Hi students, welcome to another Mr. Ness screencast. Today's aim is gentrification. Pause the video, look these questions over, and get ready to copy some vocab terms and take some notes. Gentrification is the transition of an area's population from majority low-income residents to majority high-income residents. In simpler terms, gentrification is when many comparatively wealthy people move into an area. Gentrification can occur in different types of places where people live, but in this unit, you will be focusing on the process of gentrification in cities. So you can think of gentrification as the transition of a neighborhood from mostly low income to mostly high income. Gentrification is a major issue in cities today, and in this video, you will see some of the reasons why it is so controversial. In the US, gentrification of cities began in the 1990s, as wealthier Americans who had been living in the suburbs decided to move to cities. Many of these gentrifiers were white, and many of them were the children of couples who had left cities in the 1950s and 1960s during the period of white flight and suburbanization. So in a way, gentrification in the 1990s and after can be seen as a return to cities by white Americans. Now let's look at some reasons why gentrification of cities began in the 1990s. And the first reason is that crime dropped in this decade. You can see on the graph that crime peaked in 1990 and then fell steadily over the next decades. This is in New York City. The causes of this decline in crime are the subject of another controversial debate, also related to gentrification, but I will not be covering that in this video. If you're curious, you can ask me in class. So the increase in safety in the 1990s contributed to the second reason for gentrification at this time, and that was the fact that properties and rent in the city were relatively cheap, especially from the point of view of wealthier suburbanites. In the 1970s and 1980s, cities were not very desirable places to live because of the extent of urban decay. And with little competition for housing, prices were low, and that was attractive to gentrifiers. Also, city homes were old, and they had beautiful architectural details like stonework and woodwork, which did not exist in cookie-cutter suburban homes. Now that they felt safe in the city, gentrifiers discovered these unique homes that their ancestors, in many cases, had left in previous decades. And another thing that gentrifiers discovered was that city life has a lot of benefits. They found that they could live near a variety of restaurants, bars, or shops, and they could get to them all by walking. They could even walk to work. After spending all their time driving everywhere in the suburbs, this was very exciting. So gentrification started in the 1990s, and it is still happening today. And now we're going to look at a brief summary of the controversy surrounding it. Gentrification creates conflict in neighborhoods because it benefits some residents but hurts others. Let's look first at why people might welcome it. Gentrification always leads to an increase in property values in a neighborhood. As people move into the neighborhood, the demand for housing increases, so prices rise. For neighborhood residents who own property, like a house or a building, increased property values are usually a good thing. The owner can now sell their property for more than they could before, or they can rent it out for more money than they could before, or they can use the increased equity in their home to get a loan from a bank. Gentrification also usually leads to improved services in a neighborhood. Businesses are more likely to invest in a wealthier neighborhood. And sadly, the government is too. So when wealthier residents move in, more businesses open, and public services like sanitation, public safety, and schools improve as well. Theoretically, all the residents of a neighborhood could benefit from these improvements. However, gentrification is more complicated. Let's look now at some reasons why residents of a neighborhood might oppose gentrification. First, the increase in property values, which benefits property owners, hurts residents who do not own property and have to rent. The increased demand for housing causes rents to go up, sometimes to the point where longtime residents of the neighborhood can no longer afford to pay them. These people are priced out. That means that they cannot afford it and have to leave their neighborhood. For longtime residents, this can be very painful. Also, as wealthy residents move in and poorer residents are priced out, the character of the neighborhood changes. Businesses are priced out and closed down, and they're replaced by new shops that cater to wealthier tastes. Often, some of these new stores are multinational chains like Starbucks. And you can think of gentrification as creating a sense of placelessness. Older residents of the neighborhood may feel like the neighborhood has become unrecognizable. Finally, older residents, especially renters, may see these changes as unfair and resent their inability to afford the neighborhood that many of them grew up in. And because many longtime residents are people of color, while many of the gentrifiers are white, this conflict is also wrapped up in our country's history of segregation and racist housing policies. Let's end by looking at what these changes look like. These pictures show Park Slope, a neighborhood in Brooklyn. The picture on the left was taken in the 1980s, and the one on the right was taken in 2019. Notice the visible changes. In 2019, the buildings are no longer abandoned, they've been renovated. The sidewalks are clean. There seems to be more activity going on the streets. The gentrified Park Slope, the one on the right, seems like a nicer place to live, at least to me. But it's also one of the most expensive places to live in the entire country. Here's a picture of changing culture. This is in the Greenwich Village neighborhood of Manhattan. The picture on the left was taken in the 1980s and shows a locally owned grocery store and pizzeria. These were two common businesses that give New York a sense of place. I don't actually think this picture was taken in the 80s, but I think those stores have been there since the 80s. In the picture on the right, which is taken much more recently, both businesses have been replaced by Grom, a luxury ice cream shop that is headquartered in Italy. All right, I hope you can begin to see why gentrification is controversial. You will look at this issue in more depth in class. But now it's time to review the objectives. If you don't know the answer to any of them, rewind the video and look again. I will see you in class. Bye, students.